Somebody's getting sued today. That's the very first thing I thought when I heard the news. Coffee in my hand to try to make it through an insufferably long and dry natural science class at Nassau Community College. I just couldn't figure out how someone could be so stupid as to fly a plane into the World Trade Center. You could see it tens of miles away on the ground, more from the sky, especially on that beautiful Tuesday morning. I thought of the old sepia-tone photograph of the small biplane that hit the Empire State Building or something years ago, how it looked like the tail was just sticking out of the building, and I think someone peeks over the edge. We had no idea what kind of plane had hit, so that was my only frame of reference. We shuffled back to the classroom, and the teacher told us what was going on. He told us that each of the twin towers had been struck by a hijacked passenger jet. He told us that one tower fell, and shortly after, the second crumbled. He told us another had hit the Pentagon, and more were in the air. And he told us classes were canceled for the rest of the day. I didn't watch the road. I didn't look at my speedometer. Traveling the Southern State Parkway eastbound, I was transfixed to my rear view mirror. I just couldn't stop anticipating some mushroom cloud behind me. I knew that I had to get to my girlfriend's house before I died in the ensuing attack, and I was never more scared in my life. But the mushroom cloud never came. We watched the TV for days on end, waiting for something, anything. No one I knew had ever lived through this kind of experience before. The news kept on comparing it to a Hollywood disaster movie, but there was no neat wrap-up at the end. There was no end. We just had to deal. 3 days later, I went to a radio station and participated in the pouring down rain for hours collecting food. A few days after that, I gave blood at the local hospital, but that didn't help anything. That didn't stop the daily funerals for those who died. And every day, a caravan of limos and cars with their headlights on would drive through town reminding you of what happened. I knew nothing I could do would bring back Vinny. I didn't know him well, but he lived 4 houses down, and I can remember him playing in the front yard with his 4 daughters. Still, there was a burning inside me that told me I had to do something. This was important. This was more important than myself, and I had to act accordingly. On September 21st, I met with the recruiter and we would sign the paperwork to promise me to the United States Navy. And with my college experience, I was eligible for the job of air traffic controller, at first not realizing the irony. I guess with everything that's happened, you guys must be getting a lot of people coming in here, I offered. No, not really, replied the recruiter. I grew up on Long Island to a middle-class family, and being the middle child with an older brother and a younger sister, I always felt like a bit of a redundancy. They already had a boy, the firstborn, and a girl, the baby, and then there was me. Still, that was all in my head, as it was probably in the head of most people who play my role. I wasn't antisocial, but I was a little more solitary than the average child. I'd spend hours carefully positioning my He-Man figures, storming Castle Grayskull, each toy locked in Mortal Kombat or Dire Straits. Everyone had a storyline. I excelled in art, probably because I could control all around me with a pen and pad. The power to influence perception was immediate and it invigorated me. And in my teen years, this would translate into music. I was never the best guitarist in the world, but I wrote songs from my heart. My greatest moment might have been when I debuted a song at a gig about a girl that I'd been pining over, but she was just toying with my emotions. Someone told me she walked out crying, and I felt like Elvis. That girl was an exception to the rule, though. In my late teens to present courting, one girl told me that when I fall for a girl, I make it impossible for her not to fall for me, that my focus and passion are too overwhelming. And that didn't just apply to my love life. I rarely felt nonchalant about anything. Now, if you had told me a week before the towers that I would have joined the military, I would have flat out laughed. I had admired people in the service, particularly World War II vets, but never had an iota of an urge to enlist. Once when I was 18, I had to make an emergency pee stop, and the only place still open in a strip mall that we pulled into was an Army recruiting station. After using their toilet, they tried to give me some pamphlets. I saw Saving Private Ryan, and I respect all you guys, but it's not for me. It's something I have to do, I told her. She couldn't understand why, and I couldn't blame her. I'd always been rash and impulsive, but joining the military at this point in time for 5 years, no less? Will you still be there for me? I don't know what I would have done if she had said no. But she didn't test me, though. She saw how deeply affected I was and how I hadn't been myself since it all happened. She felt my need to do something, to be able to know that in this time of chaos and confusion, I stood up for my country, even if I had never displayed a particularly patriotic bone in my body before. Yes, I'll be there. She was. While I was away, she waited, and she learned to live without me there. She learned to live without me. My name is AK-1 Saka, and I am your recruit division commander. I am a self-made man. You can ask anyone on this base and they will tell you the same. This voice bellowed out of a lean Nigerian man who is now in charge of me and 90 other recruits. We slightly feared him, not because he was physically imposing, but because his accent was so thick that we could barely make out anything he said for the first week, and we didn't want to make any mistakes. Senior Chief McDonald, we feared. No bigger than AK-1, Senior was a gunner's mate, one of the saltiest, toughest types of sailor there was. He could break you down with one word, but he rarely used his voice exclusively. Now, Master Chief, he was a different story. I don't remember his last name, but I remember he felt more like a grandfather than a RDC. He put it out on Front Street the first day. Win me the Captain's Cup. Each recruit division had to try to earn different flags in categories such as cleanliness of barracks, physical fitness, and naval history, and the Captain's Cup was an Olympics of sorts towards the end of basic training in which the different divisions would compete in numerous events. Our division won 2 flags, cleanliness and Captain's Cup. Master Chief was happy. I had done it completely wrong. The schedule I had set up for myself would have me braving the Great Lakes winter for basic training and the Pensacola heat for my A school. I justified the poor planning in my head by saying that if I could withstand that, I could withstand anything. Now, A school was where I would learn enough to have a working knowledge of air traffic control. The idea was to get us to a level where we would be trainable at a specific duty station. Even though I was only probably older by 2 or 3 years than most of my shipmates, I felt detached from them. We would all hang out, but I felt like a stranger. We would go to clubs, and I would have a drink while they sipped soda and futilely try to pick up girls. Now, I did enjoy myself every now and then, but I always remembered the old adage, it doesn't matter where you work up your appetite, as long as you eat at home. I graduated top of my class from A school and had first choice of duty station, and I knew from the beginning that I wanted NAS Oceana. I had entered the service as an E3 or airman due to my college credits, but I knew damn well that I didn't want to go as a ship without a petty officer's chevron, which was the next pay grade up. Oceana was also in Virginia, which was only a relatively short 8-hour drive from New York. When it came time to pick, there were 2 Oceana billets. Everything was looking good. The first year at the station, I didn't do much. When I first arrived at Oceana, the 3rd class petty officer examination was a week away. Already filled with too many personnel to train, they had me sit on the couch and study for most of the time. And I would get the results a month or so later when I was greeted one morning by my lead division commander who asked, "How you doing, petty officer?" The thrill would soon subside, though, when I was sent to base security on a temporary active duty assignment. For the next 6 months, I would stand behind a concrete barrier in the snow and rain with a 12-gauge shotgun for 8 hours at a clip. By the end of my shift, I would be soaked to the bone. And I would also be forgotten for the most part by my fellow air traffic controllers. If I were lucky, I would get some prime real estate at the enlisted club and split $5 pictures with my friend Coriati, who had followed me from A school. But for a long time, that was about it. It was Christmas time and I was home. It felt good to be off the base, even though it was impossible to see the world through civilian eyes. Still, I had taken leave for 10 days and planned to make it count. We were stuck with the worst table at the Cheesecake Factory, at the end of a row of 2-person tables under the spiral staircase. Still, I had it planned out perfectly. As an early present, I had made her a book. It was a fancy red leather photo album, and inside I had drawn illustrations of the different times in our relationship. The wanting, the having, the leaving, and on the last page, a declaration of my love and the question. I gave it to her and she read the book to herself, Using the tears in her eyes as my cue, I dropped down to one knee and produced the best diamond ring that I could bring myself to buy without having a heart attack. She said yes, and we received a small round of applause from the people we were elbow to elbow with. I would have to leave Oceana soon. It didn't matter that I had been advanced twice since being stationed there, and that the people who transferred to my tower at my pay grade were allowed to extend their tour. It didn't matter that E-nothings fresh out of A school were now getting 3-year orders when I only had 2. I would have to transfer. By that time, I had been back at Air Operations for a year and had made myself a staple of the controllers. We worked hard and partied considerably harder. Half the time, the shifts would just adjourn to Kelly's Tavern and we'd close the joint out. And for the first time since I had left home, I felt like I had made some real friends who knew what I was going through and actually cared. Aside from my girl and 2 other friends, all my buddies back home had yet to visit me in my 2.5 years away. I felt like I was losing a family, but that's the life of a serviceman. Before going to my next duty station, I would attend C School in Pensacola to train me to be a carrier air traffic controller. I would find that the rules for my pending assignment, the USS Enterprise, would be completely different from the shore regulations that I had been accustomed to. Now, the people in my class were from different stations all over the world, but we had one unifying factor: partying. This is usually enough to make any group of sailors into a social unit. After C School, I went home for a month to get married. It was everything that it was supposed to be. Having numerous contacts in the wedding industry, the affair was incredibly lavish. The town church, a 47 Cadillac to the botanical gardens for pictures, reception at the hall overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, and 200-something guests. We would jet off to the secluded island of Virgin Gorda for a week, and we had minor disagreements, but we chalked it up to being estranged for so long. After the honeymoon, we would pack up her things and we would move into my apartment in Virginia and start looking for a house. It was all going according to plan. I hated my ship being in the yards, but I also planned it that way. I went to the Enterprise knowing that it would need a year-long overhaul before it could go back out to sea. Being that my new wife had taken the leap of faith and left everything she knew hundreds of miles away, I wanted to have some time before leaving for the seas, and she quickly got a teaching position at a local elementary school. The days were long, and they started early. Typically, I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning, quietly get showered and dressed, kiss my sleeping spouse on the forehead, and not return until 4 or 5. She would get in soon after that, but we were generally tired. I had gotten her a yellow Labrador puppy so that the house would seem less empty when I was away. Now, after some trying periods between me and the pup, Killian would soon listen attentively to my every word while he would run circles around her. The yards are a purgatory for sailors, especially ones who specialized in skills that you need to be out to sea for. An air traffic controller quickly becomes a handyman when there's no air traffic to control. Being a second-class petty officer by this time, I handled more managerial tasks. Damage control petty officer, safety petty officer, divisional records petty officer, ground transportation petty officer. These were all jobs that I hadn't signed up for, but as my dad had told me before I joined, they tell you to scrub a toilet, make sure yours is the cleanest on the boat. My wife and I had grown distant pretty quickly. Maybe it was presumptuous of us to think that we could be separated for such a long time and then suddenly come back so easily. Maybe we mistook the security of knowing someone is there as proof that we really should be there. We talked less, we snapped more. We even started couples therapy a few weeks before my 7-month cruise. I thought we had made progress, and I looked forward to healing further upon my return. Now, just prior to the cruise, I had again been sent to the security division. Why don't they just make more master-at-arms? I could never understand it. But this meant longer hours, and worse, they were on the night shift. On a normal day, I'd be lucky to see her for 20 minutes. And I didn't even see her on the last day. I spent that watch writing out a long letter, which I sent to my best friend back home. It detailed how much I loved her and how sorry I was that things had been bad. And it was meant for her in the event that I never made it back home. By the 4th of July, we had logged thousands of miles. We had pulled into Croatia once, and I found its city of Split to be the loveliest place I had ever been. Almost all of the roofs were red clay, and their kuna was very much like our dollar, and every street had 5 bars with front patios where you could sit down with an unpronounceable named beer and watch the most beautiful girl you've ever seen walk by, only to have the newest, most beautiful girl you've ever seen walk the other way. Still, I was a good boy, even if some around me were not. We had also stopped in Greece, which was not nearly as pleasant. We had been informed of which sections of towns to avoid due to a communist anti-American rally. Another funny thing was to start watching cruise couples start to form. Whether it be in the service or on any kind of expedition, it's common for these temporary relationships to start knowing that they would have to end because someone's wife or husband is waiting on the pier. But by the 4th of July, I had received nothing from my wife in the form of letters or packages. I had received numerous packages from my mom, from my brother, even her parents. I felt embarrassed that I had to plead with my own wife to send me mail. She eventually did, sparsely. I must admit that I did have thoughts of using this cruise as a chance to sow wild oats, but instead decided to use it as a Lent. I would resist all urges, and if I really wanted to make this marriage work, I would stay true in all respects, even when most around didn't. And most of them didn't care that they didn't. I was Marshal. Marshal is an air traffic control position specific to carrier operations. As a Marshal controller, it's my responsibility to take up to 20 aircraft at a time returning from various missions and diminishing fuel states and organize them in a spiraling staircase pattern, just 1,000 feet from each other until the boss was ready to have them land. Usually while the ship was still turning, I'd get the ramp time or time that the first plane should land and start sending them in, handing them off to the approach controller. Betts, I need to know your intentions on re-enlisting. Chief, I'm sorry, but I can't do it. I've done my time the best I could, but it's just too hard back home. You know what this means, right? Yeah, I know. I knew it meant that once I was qualified at Marshal Control, I would sit there and train everyone else, not advancing further. And there was big money at the time, almost $30,000 for a 5-year re-up, but I couldn't see myself doing it. Plus, I didn't mind training everyone. As debatably the hardest position in air traffic control, I prided myself in being able to teach my shipmates the rules and the techniques, the skills and the tricks needed. Being stuck on Marshal shed light on a new path and woke the teacher inside me. We all know what happened 5 years ago today, and we will never forget. The fleet admiral had been flown onto our ship for the 5-year anniversary of the attacks. We were in the middle of the Persian Gulf, where roaring flames from offshore oil rigs could be seen at night. All available personnel were called to the flight deck for his address. But he made little mention of why we were really here. He instead recounted how many missions we had conducted, how many tons of ordnance had been dropped, and how many terrorists we had killed. Had they all forgotten? Had they all been so wrapped up in our accomplishments that they forgot why we were even in this situation? A fury raged inside of me, only vented by the tears rolling down my face. This day was not for us. We have Memorial Day and Veterans Day, and we can even claim some part of Independence Day. But these sons of bitches were claiming that this day, this farce called Patriots Day, was their own. Vinny wasn't an outstanding patriot. He wasn't particularly noble. Vinny, as a member of the NYPD, had done what he had to do that day 5 years ago, and he died. He wasn't trying to bring peace to the world or to make it safer. He was murdered trying to save others who were just trying to do their jobs, but they were murdered too. And these sons of bitches were trying to take that away and molest it into some opportunity to pat each other on the back. I knew then that we had lost the picture. I knew then there was absolutely no way I'd ever re-enlist. The pier was packed when we finally arrived home in Norfolk. It seemed so foreign to see the base that, as a security sentry, I'd watched over for the longest time. And after what seemed like a lifetime, they finally let us off, and I ran into the arms of my wife and my whole family who had made the trip down. Next, I met my 6-month-old niece for the first time, and I carried her along with my 100-pound sea bag the half-mile walk back to the car. But within weeks, it would all be over. The old problems were still there. They had never left. The distance just cemented the verdict, and within a month we were looking into separation. I never got a clear answer, but I believe she thought that it would be more fair to wait until I got home to tell me. There was nobody else. It just didn't work. Once you're re-socialized, it's still nearly impossible to see things the way you used to. I decided to finish my associate's degree in Virginia while I planned my next move, but I saw and still often see myself separate from civilians in the world. There was no fanfare when we returned. A newspaper spread, and that was about it. While the mantra at the time was, "I don't support the war, but I do support the troops," I just didn't see it. We immediately seemed forgotten to the general masses that just carried on with their lives. I was taking classes with kids that couldn't find Iraq on a map and had no idea we still had troops in Afghanistan. People who probably don't spare a thought a week on their fellow countrymen dying overseas. About the broken homes the strains of duty produce. Of the people who still look for every exit in every room they enter because that's what they were trained to do out of necessity. Jose Naroski wrote, "In war, there are no unwounded soldiers." I am an American flag, not because I fought, and not because I faced the unknown. I am an American flag, not because I agree with or love my country. I am an American flag, not because I defend the rights of my countrymen to live as equals and pursue their happiness. I am an American flag because I'm said to mean something special, but too often I'm left alone, forgotten, and tattered in the rain.